Greetings to you all. Thank you, Cynthia. Congratulations to Citembiso for this perfect presentation. And congratulations to all the members of the organization for this important event. So as Cynthia said, my topic for today is Liberating Fixed Identities, a decolonial examination of theo ideology. While Christianity, through its historical colonizing processes in Latin America, operates as a colonial pedagogy, and more specifically, as a colonial pedagogy of gender, the ways in which gender is constructed by determining universalisms around the binary male-female are disciplined by Christian moral categories. Christian heterosexual ideology sacralizes and fixes identities based on norms that marginalize and experiencing challenging the rigid hierarchical gender binary, male-female, heterosexual, homosexual, cisgender, transgender. In this context, a decolonial examination analysis of ideology that regulates gender and the material effects it has on its lives disciplines. Contributing to this examination are Marcela Altausrid, analysis of heterosexual theo ideology, Maria Lugones' concept of fractured locus, and Gloria Zaldúa proposal of a mestiza identity. The objective of a decolonial analysis is to denounce the historical processes of docility of bodies, as well to announce more creative forms of identity and sociability, which free fixed identities, thus guaranteeing a more just existence for people of all sexes, sexual orientations, gender identities, and expressions. From the Argentinian theologian Marcela Altausrid, it is possible to speak of a heterosexual theo ideology because theology must be understood as a normative sexual ideology. For her, all theology is sexual theology. That is, if it does not claim to be sexually dissident, it is a heterosexual theology. And here I quote her. I have already said that theology is a sexual act. Theology is a sexual ideology performed in a sacralizing pattern. It is a sexual divinizing orthodoxy, right sexual dogma, and orthopraxy, right sexual behavior. Theology is sexual action. Theologians, therefore, are nothing else but sexual performers who need to take many ethical and sometimes partisan sexual decisions when reflecting on God and humanity, because theology is never innocuous or sexually innocent or neutral. End of quote. From this reflection, Altausrid established a direct relationship between theology and heterosexuality, stating that the ideology of traditional and hegemonic theology is heterosexual. She calls this ideological and heterosexual theology a T-theology. And I quote her again. We will refer sometimes to T-theology as ideology, that is a totalitarian construction of what is considered to be the one and only theology, which does not admit discussion or challenges from different perspectives, especially in the area of sexual identity and its close relationship with political and racial issues. By making explicit this ideological relationship between theology and heterosexuality, Altausrid is showing that this gear organizes bodies, existence, and identities. And not does only it organize them, but it locates them in a power center that destroys plurality. For her, the T-theology is colonially grounded and is sustained in history through sexual and economic pacts. After all, there is an economy of sexuality that makes use of fixed bodies, because fixed identities are controllable identities. Faced then with a heterosexual theo ideology, a possible decolonial way out of this prescribed script is to liberate bodies through dissident and revolutionary experience. These experiences are realized in what the Argentine philosopher Maria Lugones called a fractured locus. For Lugones, in the modern colonial gender system, the decolonial feminist task, and here I would add the theological feminist task, is, quote, begins by her saying the colonial difference emphatically resisting her epistemological habit of erasing it. Seeing it, she sees the world anew, and then she requires herself to drop her enchantment with woman, the universal, and begins to learn about other resistors at the colonial difference. End of quote. One example of resistance of the category of womanhood is the borderland identity proposed by Gloria Anzaldúa. Anzaldúa presents herself as a Chicana, Tejana, working class, dyke, feminist, poet, writer, theorist. This way of talking about her own existence complexified her life and her social roles. My identity is always in flux, she used to say. This idea of identity in flux is radically contrary to the idea of a fixed identity because, I quote her, identity flows between over aspects of a person. Identity is a river, a process. Contained within the river is its identity, and it needs to flow, to change, to stay a river. If it stopped, it would be a contained body of water, such as a lake or a pond. The changes in the river are external, changes in the environment, riverbed, weather, animal life, and internal, within the waters. A river's content flow within its boundaries, end of quote. This river identity, this flow of water that breaks with the banks is configured in what Anzaldúa calls the new mestiza. She spoke from the border between the United States and Mexico, in which she was recognized as a mestiza. So what she does is a displacement of the concept, proposing a new identity, one that breaks with borders and inhabits the crossroads. According to Anzaldúa, quote, the new mestiza is a category that threatens the hegemony of neoconservative because it breaks down the labels and theories used to manipulate and control us. Poaching holes in their categories, labels, and theories means poaching holes in their walls, end of quote. Anzaldúa is decolonizing the knowledge about herself, disorganizing the labels, and creating new ways of interpreting her own life. In proposing a new mestiza, Anzaldúa is retelling her story and her destiny. She's breaking through walls, flooding the margins, and taking on possibilities of connections with life and its plurality. The new mestiza is not the other, it's her. It's theory remade from personal transgressions of the limits imposed by heteronormative regime. It's a decolonial attempt not to be assimilated by the system. The borderland identity proposed by Anzaldúa is the liberation from fixed identities, is the fractured locus that resists gender coloniality and therefore resists the normative impositions of hegemonic Christianity. To release liberation theology, it is necessary to recognize those river identities that flood the boundaries of our static theologies, because the fractures already exist, and they are what shake the already fragile edifice of patriarchy, sexism, racism, and homotransphobia. Thank you.
And having said that, I'll move over to Anna's paper, because it links. I like you were talking about river identities, borderland identities. I found your paper challenging and thought-provoking, and I was thinking, I recently, like last year, did a paper for a feminist journal, and I was studying the Canaanite woman in Matthew. In Mark, she's the Syrophoenician woman, and I use in my methodology conceptual blending theory, which is about how people, how we understand, we create meaning and understanding in situations as they happen. And my argument, or I don't know if it always came out the way I envisaged it, but my argument was the woman, although many commentators think that the fact that maybe she knelt to Jesus is not a good thing or whatever. I argue, using the conceptual blending theory, that she used selective projection, and for her, she was negotiating for what she was after. And at that moment, she chose to ignore the injustices. We cannot necessarily say she did not see the insult or the injustice, but she had her own agency. She knew what she came for, and that is what she focused on. And I'm thinking maybe that's how also bodies are liberated. It's good, of course, to have those who can speak out without fear and challenge the system, but also there are those who maybe don't have that power to speak out. And it is always a danger, actually, to challenge the system itself. But there's always that aspect of how do these colonized bodies and fixed identities. I like how you describe that, because then fixed identities can be controlled. They are controllable. And I understand that indeed that is the point of the whole capitalist system of caging people. And if I still have time, also you triggered in me, in my context, where I come from in Zimbabwe, and I think in many parts of Southern, Central, and East Africa, one of the issues is that of polygamy in marriage, because the church strongly is for, generally, especially the non-indigenous churches, because we now then have this divide of the indigenous churches or the African initiated churches, and then the church which came from the West. And there's this thing about polygamy is not allowed. And I don't know if it equates to polyamorous relationships in the North, but in my context, there's that issue. And when it's been raised, there's fear, I think, usually amongst theologians, the clergy, and academics on who is going to bring this subject up, and shall we start talking about it? So what you have is, it's there in the state, in like, for example, in Zimbabwe, you have the choice legally. You can choose to have more than one, although it's still not gender balanced, because I think you can marry more than one wife. So those are things that were triggered by me. Thank you, Stembiso and Anna.